The morning sky over Kepler 442c burned red as enemy ships tore through the atmosphere. Dr. Naya Vell pressed her face against the reinforced glass of the research station, watching plasma bolts rain down on the peaceful colony below. Just hours ago, she had been cataloging plant samples from the forest moon. Now everything was on fire. "The communication array is still online," called engineer Tam Vell from across the room. His hands moved quickly over the control panels, trying to boost their signal strength. "But not for long. They're targeting all our infrastructure." Naya ran to the emergency transmitter. Around her, 50,000 Velithians were trapped on this remote world with nowhere to run. Their species had never developed weapons of war. They were researchers, teachers, farmers. The concept of unprovoked violence was foreign to them until today. The Drakari Empire had arrived without warning. Their massive black ships had emerged from hyperspace like hungry predators, immediately opening fire on civilian targets. No demands, no negotiations, just pure destruction. War Chief Korvac's forces were known across the galaxy for their brutality, but this attack made no sense. The Velithians had nothing the Drakari could want. "Send the distress signal on all frequencies," Naya ordered, her normally calm voice shaking. "Tell everyone what's happening here." Tam's fingers flew over the controls. "Broadcasting now. The message is going out to every civilized world in range." Through the window, Naya watched Drakari ground troops advancing through the colony streets. The aliens moved like killing machines, their reptilian faces hidden behind dark combat masks. They showed no mercy to the Velithian civilians who tried to flee. Children, elderly, scientists, all were cut down without hesitation. "Response coming in," Tam reported, but his voice carried no hope. "The Centauri Republic says they cannot spare ships. The Andorian Federation expresses sympathy, but calls the situation regrettable. The Trade Coalition suggests we negotiate surrender terms." More responses flooded in. Every major civilization in the sector offered the same empty words. Thoughts and prayers, but no action. The Velithians were weak, defenseless, with no military value. No one would risk war with the Drakari Empire to save them. A plasma blast struck the building, shaking the entire structure. Emergency lights flickered as power systems failed across the compound. Through the smoke and chaos, Naya could see Drakari soldiers approaching their position. "Keep broadcasting," she told Tam. "Someone out there might listen." Far across the galaxy, Communications Officer Marcus Rivera sat at his station aboard Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station, Omega-7. The night shift was usually quiet, monitoring routine traffic between human colonies. Marcus sipped his coffee and watched data streams scroll across his screens when an emergency beacon caught his attention. The signal was weak, distorted by distance and interference, but the automated translation systems quickly decoded the message. Marcus read the text twice, then called his supervisor. "Chief, you need to see this," Marcus said into his comm unit. "We've got a distress call from the Kepler system. Unprovoked attack on a civilian population. 50,000 people under fire." Chief Petty Officer Rachel Brooks arrived at his station within minutes. She read the message, her expression growing grim. "Velithians, peaceful research species, no military capability whatsoever." "Orders, Chief?" Marcus asked. "Forward this to Fleet Command immediately. Priority 1. The message traveled up the chain of command at light speed." Within an hour, it reached the desk of Admiral Helena Stone aboard the flagship Indomitable, currently docked at Luna Station. Stone was reviewing patrol schedules when her aide brought her the emergency report. Admiral Stone had served in the Terran Defense Fleet for 30 years. She had seen humanity grow from a single-world species to a major galactic power. She understood the delicate politics of interstellar relations, the careful balance that kept peace between the stars. But she also understood something else that many species had forgotten. Sometimes peace could only be preserved through strength. "What's our response time to the Kepler system?" she asked her aide. 18 hours at maximum burn, Admiral. But, ma'am, with respect, the Volithians have no strategic value. The Drakari Empire has 12 times our fleet strength. Command might prefer a diplomatic solution. Stone studied the tactical display showing Drakari positions throughout the sector. The enemy was powerful, well-armed, and had never faced serious resistance from any species they had conquered. Most civilizations preferred to avoid conflict with them entirely. "Prep the fleet for immediate departure," Stone ordered. "Full battle configuration." Her aide stared at her in shock. "Ma'am, did you say full battle configuration?" 200 ships. Every destroyer, cruiser, and dreadnought we can muster. If we're going to make a statement, we're going to make it loud and clear." Word spread quickly through the fleet. "Captain, Elena Vasquez of the destroyer Retribution received her orders while conducting training exercises near Mars. Commander David Park of the cruiser Vengeance was pulled from shore leave. Across the solar system, human warships began converging on Luna Station with unprecedented speed. Back on Kepler 442c, the situation grew desperate. The Drakari had surrounded the research station where Naya and Tam had taken shelter with 200 other survivors. Plasma fire had cut through their defenses, and enemy soldiers were moving through the lower levels. "Any word from the outside?" asked Jorik 9, the station's security chief. He clutched an energy rifle that had never been designed for military use. Tam shook his head. "Still broadcasting, but no one is coming. We're on our own." Through the shattered windows, they could see Drakari transports landing in the colony center. More troops poured out, along with heavy weapons platforms. This was not just an attack, it was complete annihilation. "Why are they doing this?" whispered Dr. Maya Seren, a young botanist who had arrived on Kepler just weeks ago. "We never threatened them. We never even met them before today." Naya had been wondering the same thing. The Drakari were brutal, but they usually had reasons for their attacks: resources, strategic position, territorial expansion. Kepler 442c had none of these things. It was a peaceful backwater world dedicated to scientific research. A thunderous roar echoed across the sky. The survivors looked up to see more Drakari ships descending through the atmosphere. Massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything the Volithians had ever built. The enemy was bringing in their heavy assault forces. "That's it," Jorik said quietly. "We're finished." But Tam was still monitoring the communication channels, and something strange was happening. The automated distress beacon was still broadcasting, but now it was receiving responses from an unexpected source. Ship after ship was acknowledging the signal, all bearing the same identifier: Terran Defense Fleet. "Naya!" Tam called out, his voice filled with confusion. "I'm picking up fleet movements in hyperspace, big ones. Someone is coming." "Who?" she asked, moving to his station. "The identification codes say human. But that can't be right. Humans barely have any ships. They're new to space travel." Above them, War Chief Korvac stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his forces systematically destroy the Volithian colony. The operation was proceeding perfectly. By nightfall, there would be no survivors, no witnesses, no evidence of what had transpired here. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "long-range sensors are detecting hyperspace signatures approaching the system." Korvac barely looked up from his tactical display. "Probably some trade vessel that got too close. Destroy it when it arrives." "Sir, the signatures are unusual, very large, and there are many of them." Now, Korvac turned his attention to the sensor readings. His reptilian eyes widened as he saw the data. Ships were approaching at speeds that should have been impossible, their energy signatures unlike anything in his database. "How many?" he demanded. 200 contacts and rising, sir. They'll be here within the hour." Korvac felt something he had not experienced in decades of warfare: uncertainty. No species had ever responded to Drakari aggression with such overwhelming force. Most civilizations barely maintained token defense fleets. "What species?" he asked. His officer's voice was barely a whisper. "The identification signals say, 'Human, sir.' They call themselves Deathworlders." The fabric of space twisted and tore as 200 human warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. The massive dreadnought Indomitable led the fleet, its dark hull bristling with weapon systems that had never been seen in this sector of the galaxy. Behind it came destroyers, cruisers, and frigates, all moving with mechanical precision that spoke of countless hours of training. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Helena Stone studied the tactical display with cold efficiency. The Drakari fleet was larger than intelligence reports had suggested, but size meant nothing if it was not used properly. She had spent decades studying alien warfare tactics, and the Drakari followed predictable patterns. "Captain Vasquez, take your destroyer group and begin evacuation of the civilian population," Stone ordered through the comm system. "Commander Park, position your cruisers for orbital bombardment support. All ships, battle stations." Throughout the human fleet, alarms sounded as crews rushed to their positions. These were not the desperate, frightened responses of a species facing overwhelming odds. These were the calm, methodical preparations of predators who had found their prey. "Captain." Elena Vasquez acknowledged her orders from the bridge of the destroyer Retribution. Around her, the crew worked with deadly efficiency, their movements quick and precise. Lieutenant Commander Torres handled navigation, while Chief Weapons Officer Kim prepared the ship's defensive systems. "Ma'am, Drakari ships are moving to intercept," reported Torres. 12 enemy cruisers closing on our position." Vasquez smiled grimly. "Let them come. All weapons prepare for engagement. Helm, take us down into the atmosphere. We have people to save." On the surface of Kepler 442c, Dr. Naya Vel watched in amazement as the human ships descended through the burning sky. The Drakari had immediately moved to engage them, but something was wrong with the enemy response. Their plasma weapons, which had torn through Velithian structures like paper, barely scratched the hulls of the human vessels. "How is that possible?" whispered Tam Vel, staring at his sensor readings. "Those ships are taking direct hits from heavy plasma cannons and showing minimal damage." Young engineer Maya Seren pointed at the tactical display. "Look at their construction. Those aren't normal hull materials. The humans built their ships like fortresses." The first human dropship touched down in the colony courtyard, its hull still glowing from atmospheric entry. The rear hatch opened with a hydraulic hiss, and out stepped beings that made the survivors gasp in wonder. The humans were tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a confidence that seemed impossible given the chaos around them. Staff Sergeant Alex Kane was the first out of the dropship, his assault rifle sweeping the area for threats. Behind him came Corporal Rosa Martinez, the squad medic, and Private Jake Thompson, whose job was to clear obstacles with controlled explosions. They wore powered armor that made them look like walking tanks, but they moved with surprising grace. "Civilians, this way," Kane called out in accented but understandable Velithian. "We're here to get you out." Naya approached the human soldiers cautiously. She had studied many species during her career, but humans were new to galactic politics. Most civilizations considered them primitive, barely advanced enough for space travel. Looking at these warriors, she realized how wrong those assessments had been. "You came," she said simply. "Everyone else ignored our signal, but you came." Kane's helmet retracted, revealing a scarred face and dark eyes that had seen too much. "Combat. Someone was in trouble. That's all we needed to know." Above them, the space battle intensified as Admiral Stone put her tactical experience to work. The Drakari had numerical superiority, but they had never faced opponents who fought like humans. Commander David Park of the cruiser Vengeance demonstrated. this perfectly as he engaged 3 enemy battleships simultaneously. "Ramming speed!" Park ordered calmly as his ship accelerated toward the largest Drakari vessel. His crew executed the maneuver without hesitation, their ship's reinforced prow tearing through enemy armor like a knife through silk. The Drakari commander tried to respond with standard battle doctrine, but human tactics defied everything in their military textbooks. Human ships rammed enemy vessels, used debris as weapons, and continued fighting even when critically damaged. It was warfare conducted by beings who had learned to survive on a world that tried to kill them every day. War Chief Korvac watched his tactical display with growing horror as his forces were systematically dismantled. The humans fought with a combination of technical skill and savage determination that his species had never encountered. When a human ship was damaged, it did not retreat. It pressed forward using its own destruction as a weapon. "How many casualties?" he demanded from his communications officer. 17 ships destroyed, sir. 23 more heavily damaged. The humans have lost 3 frigates. Korvac could not believe what he was hearing. His forces outnumbered the humans 3-1, yet they were being crushed. What kind of species are these Deathworlders? On the planet's surface, the human rescue operation proceeded with military precision. Sergeant Kane's squad had linked up with Security Chief Jorik 9 and was organizing the evacuation of civilians from the research station. The Drakari ground forces had tried to interfere, but they quickly learned that humans were just as dangerous on land as they were in space. Private Thompson placed charges on a Drakari barricade that was blocking their escape route. The explosion not only destroyed the obstacle, but sent enemy soldiers fleeing in terror. These humans used explosives like other species use tools, with casual expertise that spoke of long experience. "Move, move, move," called Corporal Martinez as she helped elderly Velithians toward the extraction point. Her medical scanner showed that several of the civilians were injured, but she had supplies and training to handle trauma cases that would have killed most species. Dr. Maya Seren stayed close to the human medic, watching in fascination as Martinez treated wounds with equipment that seemed decades ahead of standard galactic medical technology. "Your healing devices are remarkable," she said. Martinez smiled as she sealed a plasma burn with regenerative gel. "We learned to patch people up fast on Earth. You don't survive long on a death world without good medical care." "Death world?" Maya asked. "That's what other species call Earth. Too dangerous for normal life. Gravity too strong, atmosphere too reactive, weather too violent. But it made us tough." Above them, the battle reached its climax as Admiral Stone executed a maneuver that would become legendary in military history. She ordered her entire fleet to form a defensive sphere around the planet, using their own ships as shields to protect the civilians being evacuated below. Captain Vasquez brought the retribution into position, her destroyer taking hit after hit from Drakari plasma weapons. The ship's armor held, designed to withstand the crushing pressures and toxic atmosphere of humanity's homeworld. What could barely survive on Earth could certainly handle alien weapons. "Hull integrity at 70%, reported Chief Kim. "Shall we withdraw?" "Negative," Vasquez replied firmly. "Those people down there are counting on us. We hold position until every last civilian is safe." The sight of human ships absorbing planet-killing energy blasts while continuing to function sent shockwaves through the Drakari fleet. These were not normal warriors. These were beings evolved from the most hostile environment in known space, and they brought that lethality with them wherever they went. War Chief Korvac realized that he was not facing just another spacefaring species. He was fighting creatures who viewed warfare not as a necessary evil, but as a natural extension of their survival instincts. Every human ship, every human soldier, was a product of millions of years of evolution on a world that had tried to kill their ancestors every single day. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, voice filled with panic, "the humans are requesting our surrender." Korvac looked at his devastated fleet, then at the human ships that continued to fight despite massive damage. His military doctrine had no provisions for this situation. The Drakari had never faced opponents who became more dangerous when wounded. On the surface, the last group of Velithian civilians reached the human dropships. Dr. Naya Vel took one final look at her destroyed research station, then climbed aboard the rescue vessel. Around her, human soldiers checked their weapons and prepared for the next phase of the operation. "Where are we going?" she asked Sergeant Kane. The human warrior's expression was grim but determined. "Somewhere safe. But first, we're going to make sure the Drakari never do this to anyone else again." As the dropships lifted off toward the waiting fleet, Naya realized that the galaxy was about to learn a very important lesson. When Deathworlders decided to help, they did not send aid. They sent overwhelming force, guided by an unshakable moral purpose. The Drakari Empire had made the mistake of attacking innocents. While humans were watching, now they would pay the price. The ground shook as human marines launched their coordinated assault on Drakari positions across the colony. Sergeant Alex Kane led his squad through the rubble-filled streets with the patience of a born hunter, his enhanced armor allowing him to move silently despite the chaos around them. Behind him, Corporal Rosa Martinez monitored life signs of trapped civilians, while Private Jake Thompson identified enemy strongpoints for destruction. The Drakari had thought they understood ground combat. Their reptilian warriors were larger and stronger than most galactic species, equipped with advanced plasma weapons and powered armor that had conquered dozens of worlds. But as they faced the human advance, they began to realize that size and strength meant nothing against an enemy that had evolved to hunt persistent predators on the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. Kane's squad moved through a toxic gas cloud that the Drakari had released to slow their advance. The alien chemical weapon was designed to incapacitate most known species within minutes, causing respiratory failure and organ damage. The humans walked through it like a morning fog, their suit systems filtering out the toxins while their enhanced biology processed what remained. "Contact ahead," Kane whispered into his comm unit, his voice barely audible. "Drakari Patrol, 6 hostiles. Thompson, can you give us a distraction?" Private Thompson smiled behind his helmet visor. On Earth, he had trained in the Australian outback, learning to use controlled explosives in environments where a single mistake could kill him instantly. Here on Kepler 442c, the conditions were practically comfortable. The explosion that followed was not the crude demolition that most species expected from human engineering. It was surgical, precise, bringing down exactly the right section of building to block the Drakari escape route while leaving their cover intact for the Marines to use. Dr. Naya Vel watched the human tactics from the safety of the evacuation ship, her scientific mind trying to understand what she was witnessing. The Marines did not charge their enemies with reckless courage. They moved like pack hunters, coordinating their attacks with the efficiency that spoke of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. "They fight like apex predators," she whispered to Dr. Maya Saren, who was also observing the battle. "But they use technology and tactics that no animal could conceive." Maya nodded, her hands recording everything on her personal device. "Look how they adapt to the environment. Those gas clouds that force the Drakari to retreat. The humans are using them for concealment." Below them, Corporal Martinez reached, a group of wounded Velithian civilians who had been trapped in a collapsed building. The structure was unstable, filled with toxic fumes from damaged chemical storage and under constant enemy fire. Any sane species would have written off the survivors as unreachable. Martinez entered the building without hesitation, her medical scanner guiding her to the trapped civilians. The environmental hazards that made the Drakari flee were just another day at the office for someone who had trained in the volcanic caves of Iceland and the radiation zones of Chernobyl. "Stay calm. I'm going to get you out," she told the frightened Velithians in their own language. Her hands worked quickly, treating injuries with medical technology that seemed decades ahead of standard galactic equipment. One of the survivors, an elderly researcher named Dr. Cav Orn, stared at the human medic in amazement. "How do you function in these conditions? The air is poisonous, the structure is collapsing, and enemy fire is all around us." Martinez smiled as she applied regenerative gel to his wounds. "I grew up in Detroit. This is actually pretty peaceful compared to my neighborhood." Outside, the battle intensified as more human forces arrived. Commander Lisa Chen had brought her engineering corps to disable Drakari defensive positions, but she found that the enemy had prepared for conventional warfare. Their bunkers were designed to withstand plasma bombardment and kinetic strikes from standard galactic weapons. They were not designed to withstand humans who approached problems with creative chaos. Chen studied the enemy fortification through her tactical display, then turned to her team. "Thoughts?" Staff Sergeant Mike Torres pointed at the bunker's power supply. "Drakari energy systems run hot. If we could introduce a coolant failure?" While simultaneously overloading their weapons, "Capacitors," added Corporal Janet Kim, the team's electronics specialist. "The thermal shock would crack their armor like an eggshell." Chen nodded approvingly. Most species would have tried to break through the bunker's defenses by main force. Humans preferred to turn the enemy's own systems against them, using engineering, knowledge gained from surviving on a world where technology failure meant instant death. The attack that followed was a masterpiece of applied physics. The Drakari bunker did not just fall, it imploded as its own power systems turned against it, creating a chain reaction that cleared 3 city blocks of enemy positions. War Chief Korvac watched the tactical displays from his command ship with growing desperation. His ground forces were not just losing, they were being systematically dismantled by an enemy that fought with impossible efficiency. Every position his troops took was turned against them. Every weapon they deployed became a liability. "Status report," he demanded from General Vexus, his ground commander. 15% casualties and rising, sir. The humans are not fighting, like any species in our databases. They use our own weapons against us, turn our defensive positions into traps, and operate in environmental conditions that should kill them. Korvac's reptilian features twisted in confusion. "What kind of evolution produces such creatures?" "According to our intelligence files, they call their homeworld Earth. Gravity twice galactic standard, toxic atmosphere, violent weather patterns, and predators that hunt in coordinated packs. Every day of their evolution was a fight for survival. In B space, Admiral Helena Stone coordinated the battle with the calm precision of someone who had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. The Drakari fleet still outnumbered her forces, but numerical superiority meant nothing when the enemy could not adapt to human tactics. Commander David Park demonstrated this perfectly as he engaged a Drakari battle group with his cruiser Vengeance. Instead of exchanging fire at long range, he brought his ship in close, using debris from previous battles as cover while his gunners targeted specific systems on enemy vessels. "Disable their engines first," Park ordered his weapons officer. "A ship that cannot maneuver is just a target." The human approach to space combat defied every principle of galactic warfare. Most species fought at maximum range with guided weapons, trying to avoid damage through distance and evasion. Humans closed to point-blank range and slugged it out like prize fighters, their ships built to absorb punishment that would vaporize vessels from other civilizations. Back on the surface, Sergeant Kane's squad had linked up with Security Chief Jorik 9 and his remaining Velithian defenders. The aliens watched in fascination as the human Marines worked, their movements economical and purposeful. "You fight like you have done this many times before," Jorik observed, as Kane methodically cleared a Drakari strongpoint. "Every human child learns basic combat skills," Kane replied, checking his ammunition count. "Earth teaches you early that violence is a tool, and like any tool, it should be used properly." "But you show mercy to prisoners," Jorik noted, watching. as the Marines secured, captured Drakari soldiers instead of executing them. Kane's expression grew serious. Mercy is not weakness, it is strength under control. We fight to protect, not to destroy. This philosophy puzzled the Drakari forces, who had built their entire culture around domination through superior firepower. They could not understand enemies who became more dangerous when protecting others, who fought hardest when defending the weak. Dr. Naya Vel was beginning to understand, though. As she watched the human rescue operations, she realized that these Deathworlders had not just evolved to survive hostile environments. They had evolved to protect their communities, to work together against threats that no individual could face alone. They are not just predators, she explained to Maya as they watched human Marines evacuate Velithian children from a damaged school. They are cooperative predators. They hunt in packs, but they also defend in packs. The revelation was staggering. Most galactic species had evolved beyond their violent origins, becoming peaceful through prosperity and technology. Humans had taken a different path. They had become more dangerous as they became more civilized, channeling their predatory instincts into protection of their communities. As the day wore on, the Drakari resistance began to crumble. Their forces had been designed to crush weak opponents through overwhelming brutality, but they had no answer for enemies who fought smarter, harder, and with unwavering moral purpose. War Chief Korvac realized that he was facing something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans were not just another spacefaring species. They were the product of evolutionary pressures that no other known world had produced, shaped by millions of years of survival on a planet that had tried to kill them every single day. And now they had brought that lethality to the stars, guided by a moral code that made them fight hardest when protecting the innocent. The Drakari Empire was about to learn why the galaxy whispered about Deathworlders in hushed, fearful tones. The celebration was short-lived. As human forces secured the last Drakari positions on the surface, Chief Engineer Lisa Chen received an alert that made her blood run cold. Deep beneath the colony, her sensors had detected a massive energy buildup from what appeared to be a planetary bombardment system. "Admiral Stone, we have a problem," Chen reported through the comm system, her voice tense with urgency. "The Drakari have activated some kind of orbital strike platform. Energy readings are off the charts." On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Stone studied the incoming data with growing concern. The weapon was not designed for tactical strikes against military targets. It was a planet killer, capable of sterilizing all life on Kepler 442c in a matter of hours. "Estimated time to activation?" Stone asked. 2 hours, maybe less," Chen replied. "And Admiral, there are still 50,000 civilians down here. We cannot evacuate them all in time." Dr. Naya Vel watched the human response to this crisis with scientific fascination. Most species would have immediately begun calculating acceptable losses, determining how many lives could be saved versus how many would have to be sacrificed. The humans had a different approach entirely. All ships, defensive positions around. "The planet," Admiral Stone ordered without hesitation. "We shield the surface until the weapon is disabled." Captain Elena Vasquez acknowledged the order from the bridge of her destroyer Retribution, but she could not hide her concern. "Admiral, with respect, our ships cannot withstand that kind of energy output. The bombardment system is designed to crack planetary crusts." "Then we better make sure it does not get the chance to fire," Stone replied calmly. "Commander Park, prepare a strike team for infiltration of the Drakari command ship." "Chief Chen, I need you to find a way to disable that weapon from the surface." Dr. Maya Seren watched the human preparations with growing amazement. The tactical situation was hopeless by any reasonable standard, yet these Deathworlders approached it as just another problem to be solved. They did not waste time on fear or despair. They simply got to work. Chief Engineer Chen assembled her team in the colony's main research facility, where Dr. Naya Vel and her colleagues had been studying Drakari technology captured during the battle. The alien systems were sophisticated, but followed predictable patterns designed by a species that valued overwhelming force over subtle innovation. The weapon draws power from the planet's core, Chen explained to her team, which included Staff Sergeant Torres and several Velithian scientists who had volunteered to help. If we can disrupt the energy flow at the right frequency, we might be able to cause a feedback loop that destroys the system. Dr. Robert Hayes, a human physicist who had arrived with the fleet's science team, studied the Drakari schematics with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. The problem is access. The control systems are shielded by 50 meters of reinforced rock and defended by automated systems that will kill anyone who gets close. Not anyone, Torres said with a grim smile. Humans have been getting into places we are not supposed to be for thousands of years. Above them, the space battle had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. War Chief Korvac had realized that he could not defeat the human fleet in direct combat, so he had repositioned his ships to protect the planetary bombardment system while it charged. But Admiral Stone had responded by ordering her vessels to form a defensive shell around the planet itself. The sight of human warships using their own hulls to shield a world full of alien civilians sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Every species monitoring the battle watched in disbelief as the Terran Defense Fleet prepared to sacrifice itself for people they had never met. Commander David Park positioned his cruiser Vengeance directly in the path of the charging weapon system, his ship's armor already glowing from absorbed energy. "All hands, this is your captain," he announced over the ship's comm system. "We are about to do something that has never been attempted before. We are going to block a planet killer with our bare hulls." His crew responded with the calm efficiency that had made them legendary. Lieutenant Sarah Cross handled damage control, while Commander Janet Walsh coordinated power distribution. They knew the odds, understood the dangers, but they also understood something that most galactic species had forgotten. Sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. On the surface, Chief Chen's infiltration team reached the entrance to the Drakari weapon facility. The underground complex was a maze of tunnels and chambers, all designed to prevent exactly the kind of mission they were attempting. Automated defenses tracked their movement while environmental hazards made every step potentially lethal. "Toxic atmosphere, check," Torres muttered as his suit systems filtered out clouds of corrosive gas. "Extreme temperature variations, check. Radiation levels that would kill most species instantly, check. Feels like home." Dr. Hayes moved beside him, his scientific instruments mapping the energy flows that powered the planetary weapon. "The control center should be directly ahead, but the Drakari have flooded the approach tunnels with plasma." Chen studied the obstacle, then turned to her team with the kind of smile that made enemy commanders nervous. "Plasma is just superheated gas. If we can introduce coolant at the right temperature differential..." What followed was a masterpiece of human engineering. Instead of trying to fight through the plasma barriers, Chen's team turned the defensive system against itself, using controlled chemical reactions to create corridors of safe passage through the lethal environment. Dr. Naya Vel watched the operation through sensor feeds, marveling at how humans approached impossible problems. They did not accept defeat. They redefined the parameters of success until victory became achievable. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos led her strike team toward the Drakari command ship in a series of heavily armed boarding pods. The MUS enemy vessel was massive, bristling with defensive weapons and protected by energy shields that could vaporize conventional attack craft. Santos had trained for boarding actions in the zero-gravity shipyards of Luna, where a single mistake could send you drifting into the void. The vacuum of space held no terror for someone who had grown up knowing that Earth's own atmosphere was toxic to most alien life. "Remember, we need Korvac alive," she told her team as their pods approached the enemy ship. "He has the codes to disable the bombardment system." Sergeant First Class Tommy Chen, no relation to the engineer, checked his assault rifle with practiced ease. "What if he refuses to cooperate?" Santos's expression was grim behind her helmet visor. "Then we convince him. Humans can be very persuasive when we need to be." The boarding action that followed became the stuff of legend. Santos's team cut through the hull of the Drakari flagship like it was made of paper, their weapons and armor, designed to function in the hardest vacuum. The enemy tried to repel them with everything from energy weapons to hand-to-hand combat, but they had never faced opponents who fought with such systematic efficiency. War Chief Korvac watched his ship's internal defenses fall one by one as the human boarding party advanced through his flagship with terrifying precision. These Deathworlders moved through his vessel like they owned it, neutralizing security systems that had taken decades to perfect. "Sir, the humans have reached the command deck," his aide reported, voice shaking with fear. "They are demanding your surrender." Korvac looked at the tactical display showing his crumbling empire. The planetary bombardment system was nearly charged, but the human fleet had positioned itself to absorb the blast. No species in galactic history had ever made such a sacrifice for aliens they barely knew. "What kind of creatures are these?" he whispered. The answer came as Lieutenant Colonel Santos burst onto his bridge, her assault rifle trained on his command chair. Behind her came the rest of her team, their movements coordinated with the precision of pack hunters who had evolved to take down prey much larger than themselves. "War Chief Korvac," Santos said in accented but understandable Drakari, "you will disable the planetary weapon immediately." Korvac studied the human warrior with grudging respect. She was smaller than any of his soldiers, but she radiated a confidence that spoke of absolute conviction in her cause. "And if I refuse?" Santos's smile was not pleasant. "Then you will discover why the galaxy fears Deathworlders." Below on the planet's surface, Chief Chen's team had reached the control center of the bombardment system. The chamber was vast, filled with energy conduits that pulsed with barely contained power. At the center stood the main control console, protected by a force field that would incinerate anyone who tried to approach it. "The field generator is over there," Dr. Hayes pointed to a heavily shielded alcove. "But the radiation levels are lethal. Even our suits cannot protect us for more than a few minutes." Chen studied the problem with the analytical mind that had made her one of Earth's top engineers. Radiation was just another environmental hazard, like the solar storms that battered Mars colonies or the toxic atmosphere of Venus mining stations. "Torres, can you reach the generator controls?" she asked. The staff sergeant was already moving, his enhanced armor glowing as it absorbed radiation that would have killed most species instantly. "Give me 30 seconds. What he accomplished in those 30 seconds redefined the possible. Moving with the economy of motion that came from training in Earth's most hostile environments, Torres disabled the force field, reprogrammed the control systems, and initiated a cascade failure that would turn the weapon against itself. Dr. Naya Vel watched through the sensor feeds as the massive bombardment system began to tear itself apart, its own energy turning inward in a controlled implosion that would render it permanently harmless. The humans had not just disabled the weapon, they had done so in a way that would prevent it from ever being rebuilt. "Remarkable," she whispered to Maya. "They do not just solve problems, they eliminate them permanently." In space, Admiral Stone received confirmation that the planetary threat had been neutralized, but she did not order her ships to stand down. The human fleet maintained its defensive formation around Kepler 442c, their hulls still glowing from absorbed energy as they protected the world below. Captain Vasquez reported from the Retribution, her voice steady despite the massive damage her ship had sustained. "All civilian evacuation complete, Admiral. The colony is secure." "Excellent work, Captain. All ships, prepare for the final phase of operations." War Chief Korvac realized that his military career was over as Lieutenant Colonel Santos secured his bridge. The human strike team had accomplished something that should have been impossible, infiltrating and capturing a Drakari flagship with minimal casualties. "Your empire ends here," Santos told him as her team disabled his communication systems. "But you have a choice. Surrender now, and your surviving crews will be treated according to galactic conventions. Continue fighting and discover what humans do to those who threaten innocent civilians." Korvac looked around his captured bridge, seeing his officers disarmed and defeated by a handful of Deathworlders who had turned his greatest weapon against him. The reputation of his species was built on overwhelming force and brutal efficiency. But these humans had demonstrated something far more dangerous: the ability to turn strength into weakness through superior tactics and unshakable moral purpose. "I surrender," he said quietly. The words echoed through the Drakari fleet as War Chief Korvac transmitted the ceasefire order. Across the battle zone, alien warriors who had never known defeat laid down their weapons before an enemy they finally understood they could not overcome. Dr. Naya Vel stood in the research station that humans had died to protect, watching as the last Drakari ships powered down their weapons. Around her, 50,000 Velithian civilians owed their lives to beings they had never met, who had traveled across the galaxy simply because someone had asked for help. "Why did they do it?" Dr. Maya Seren asked, staring at the human fleet that still maintained protective positions around their world. "They gained nothing from saving us. They risked everything for strangers." Naya thought about the question as she watched Sergeant Kane's Marines helping Velithian children return to their families. The answer was both simple and profound, representing something that most galactic civilizations had lost in their rise to technological sophistication. "Because," she said finally, "they remember what it means to be human." The surrender of War Chief Korvac should have ended the battle, but the Drakari Empire had one final act of spite planned. Deep within the enemy flagship, a group of fanatical soldiers had taken 50 Velithian prisoners during the initial attack and were now threatening to execute them rather than face the humiliation of defeat. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos received the report while securing the bridge of the captured dreadnought. Her expression hardened as she listened to the demands from the holdout Drakari forces. They wanted safe passage off the planet in exchange for the hostages, a final insult to add to their crimes. "Negative," Santos replied coldly. "Release the prisoners immediately or face the consequences." The Drakari commander laughed through the comm system. "What can you do, human? You are trapped on this ship with limited forces. We have the advantage of position and hostages. You will give us what we want or watch innocents die." What the alien warrior did not understand was that he had just triggered something that human military historians would later call the Fury Protocol. It was not an official doctrine or written procedure, but rather an instinctive response that occurred when humans witnessed threats to those they had sworn to protect. Santos turned to her strike team with an expression that made even her own soldiers nervous. "Sergeant Chen, prepare breaching charges. Corporal Williams, thermal imaging on all hostiles. Lieutenant Rodriguez, jam their communications. We go in hard and fast." Across the galaxy, species that monitored the battle watched in fascination as human forces demonstrated why their reputation as Deathworlders extended far beyond their physical capabilities. The boarding action that followed became a textbook example of precision warfare conducted by beings who had learned to hunt as a coordinated pack. Sergeant Tommy Chen placed his explosive charges with the surgical precision of someone who had trained in the collapsed subway tunnels beneath New York, where a single miscalculation could bring down tons of concrete on rescue workers. The breaches he created were perfectly positioned to disorient the enemy while protecting the hostages. The assault lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. When it was over, all 50 Velithian prisoners were safe, the Drakari holdouts. were either dead or captured, and not a single human had suffered serious injury. The operation became legendary not for its brutality, but for its controlled application of overwhelming force guided by unwavering moral purpose. Admiral Helena Stone coordinated the aftermath from the bridge of the Indomitable, her tactical genius now focused on the larger implications of what had just occurred. The defeat of the Drakari Empire was sending shockwaves through galactic civilization, forcing every species to reconsider their assumptions about the newcomers from Earth. "Ma'am, we are receiving communications from 17 different star systems," reported her communications officer. "They are all asking the same question. How did we accomplish what we just accomplished?" Stone smiled grimly as she studied the strategic display. The Drakari had been considered one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Yet they had been systematically dismantled by a human fleet that was supposed to be primitive and inexperienced. "Tell them the truth," she ordered. "We did what any civilized species should do when innocent people are threatened. We responded with everything we had." On the surface of Kepler 442c, Dr. Naya Vell began compiling her observations into what would become the most important xenological study of the century. Her report, titled "The Deathworlder Phenomenon, an Analysis of Human Military Doctrine and Social Psychology," would reshape galactic understanding of Earth's inhabitants. "They fight with technological superiority," she dictated to her recording device while watching human Marines help rebuild damaged structures in the colony. But technology alone does not explain their effectiveness. These beings have evolved a form of cooperative aggression that allows them to function as a single organism while maintaining individual initiative. Dr. Maya Seren assisted with the research, her own observations focusing on human adaptability. "They treat environmental hazards as minor inconveniences," she noted. "Radiation, toxic atmosphere, extreme temperatures, conditions that would incapacitate most species barely affect them. Their homeworld has prepared them for any challenge the galaxy can present." The two scientists watched as Chief Engineer Lisa Chen supervised the installation of new defensive systems around the colony. The human approach to fortification was unlike anything in galactic military doctrine. Instead of building walls to keep enemies out, they created interlocking fields of fire that would channel attackers into predetermined kill zones. "They do not just react to threats," Naya observed. "They anticipate them, prepare for them, and turn the enemy's own aggression against them." Engineer Tam Vell approached the two researchers with a data tablet showing communication logs from across the sector. "You need to see this," he said excitedly. "We are receiving distress calls from 12 different systems. All of them are asking specifically for human assistance." The implications were staggering. Word of the human intervention on Kepler 442c had spread faster than light speed, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees who had witnessed the battle. For the first time in galactic history, a species was being sought out specifically for their military capabilities combined with their moral restraint. Captain Elena Vasquez coordinated the fleet's response from her damaged but still functional destroyer. The Retribution had taken enough punishment to destroy most ships twice over, yet her crew continued their duties with the calm professionalism that had impressed even their enemies. "Admiral, we have the capability to respond to 3 of these distress calls simultaneously," she reported. "Shall I begin deployment preparations?" Admiral Stone considered the strategic implications. Humanity had just announced its arrival on the galactic stage in the most dramatic way possible, but with that announcement came responsibilities that her species had never faced before. "Send humanitarian aid to all 12 systems," she ordered. "Combat forces to the 3 most critical situations, and prepare a message for Earth Command. We are going to need more ships." War Chief Korvac sat in his detention cell aboard the Quay human flagship, contemplating the destruction of everything he had built. His empire was shattered, his forces scattered, his reputation destroyed by beings he had dismissed as primitive newcomers to space travel. Lieutenant Colonel Santos visited. Him once before his transfer to a prison facility, her manner professional but cold. "Your trial will be conducted according to galactic law," she informed him. "You will be treated fairly, which is more than you offered your victims." Korvac looked up at the human warrior with something approaching respect. "How did you do it? How did a species with barely a century of space travel defeat an empire that has conquered half the sector?" Santos considered the question seriously. "Because we remember what we are fighting for," she said finally. "You fight to conquer. We fight to protect. That makes all the difference." Across the galaxy, the news networks struggled to explain what had happened at Kepler 442c. The defeat of the Drakari Empire by human forces was unprecedented, but the manner of that defeat was what truly captured galactic attention. They could have simply evacuated the Velithian population, reported one Andorian journalist. Instead, they chose to engage a superior enemy force in direct combat. When faced with a planet-killing weapon, they used their own ships as shields. This behavior defies all conventional military wisdom. "Unless," added a Centauri military analyst, "you understand that these humans operate according to principles that most species abandoned millennia ago. They still remember what it means to put the welfare of others before their own survival." Dr. Naya Vell published her preliminary findings 3 days after the battle, and the document spread through academic circles like wildfire. Her conclusion was simple but revolutionary. Humans represented a new paradigm in galactic civilization, combining advanced technology with evolutionary psychology that prioritized group survival over individual success. "The Deathworlders of Earth have not abandoned their predatory nature," she wrote. "They have refined it, channeled it, and turned it into a force for protection rather than domination. They are what every species could become if they remembered their moral foundations." 6 months later, the Human-Velithian Alliance was formally established with the signing of the Kepler Accords. The treaty created the first interstellar partnership based on mutual protection rather than economic advantage, setting a precedent that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. Admiral Stone stood on the observation deck of the New Luna Station, watching construction crews assemble the expanded Terran defense fleet. Earth's shipyards were working around the clock to meet the demand for human military assistance from across the galaxy. "Ma'am," her aide reported, "we have received another distress call, this time from the Rigel system. Pirates are attacking civilian shipping, and the local authorities are requesting human intervention." Stone smiled as she turned back toward the bridge of her flagship. The legend of the Deathworlders was spreading, carried by the stories of those who had witnessed human forces in action. Each rescue mission, each successful intervention, added to humanity's reputation as the species that responded to calls for help with overwhelming force guided by unwavering moral purpose. "Prep the fleet," she ordered, echoing the words that had started it all. "Someone needs our help." The galaxy had learned an important lesson at Kepler 442c. When aliens sent an SOS, the Deathworlders responded with a full battle fleet, and they would continue to respond, because that was what humans did when innocent people were in danger. The age of Earth had begun, and the stars would never be the same.